Ready to go? Good evening and welcome to the August 25th, 2022 meeting of the Zoning Board of Examiners and Appeals. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Ellen McKay.
Here.
Dave Hale.
Here.
Dale Smythe.
Here.
Jackie Sabina.
Here.
Skylar Quinn.
Here.
Andrew Romerdahl.
Here.
Brian Flynn.
Here.
Scott Myers.
Here.
You have a quorum. Thank you.
The first order of business on the agenda is approval of minutes. We have minutes for Thursday, July 14th, 2022. May I have a positive motion, please? Mr. Hale,
Move to approve as submitted.
seconded by Mr. Quinn. Is there any objection to, or is there any, does anybody have anything they want to change on the minutes? Any additions, deletions? Okay. Any objection to the motion? Seeing none, the motion passes and the consent agenda, no, the minutes are approved by unanimous consent. Next order of business is the special order of business. Are there any disclosures this evening? Mr. Romerdahl.
Yeah, through the chair, I disclose that I was absent from the July 14th meeting of the board, and as such will be abstaining from voting on the consent agenda tonight.
Any other disclosures? Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. There's one item on the consent agenda. It's a resolution 2022-009. May I have a positive motion for approval, please? Ms. Sabina?
So I move to approve the consent agenda request for dimensional variance from AMC 21.05.040.K.7.B.I to allow a telecommunications tower to exceed minimum separation distance.
Seconded by Mr. Smythe. Is there, does anyone want to remove this item for further discussion? Seeing none, is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, the consent agenda passes by unanimous consent. Oops. Continuing on with the agenda, no appearance requests, no unfinished business, and actions of public hearings, nothing on the regular agenda, which brings us to public hearings. First case on public hearings is, in fact, the only case 2022-0098. The petitioner is Moose Mamas. Will the staff please describe the notice given in this case?
$113 public hearing notices were mailed in accordance with Title 21 requirements on August 1st, 2022.
Are there any objections to the sufficiency of notice in this case? Seeing none, we'll continue. Will all persons wishing to testify on the appeal before the board please stand? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth? Thank you. You can be seated. Will the staff please briefly outline the case?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The case before you is an appeal of a use classification for an animal shelter as determined by the planning director. The board may decide to affirm or reverse this use classification, but please note that either decision should be accompanied by reasonably specific findings to support the board's decision. To clarify the scope of this case further, this is an appeal of use classification only and is not an appeal regarding in which zoning districts this use type is or should be allowed. The request for use classification came to the planning department when the director determined a previous email by staff indicated an incorrect use for the proposed Moose Mama's activities. A formal use classification had never been completed for this use, and the decision was made that more research was needed. Staff reached out to the Moose Mama's organization and asked them to apply for a formal use classification so the research into the proposed use of the property could be conducted. When planning staff receives a request for a use classification, they review information provided by the applicant along with other publicly available information and then determines which use type best matches the proposed use. Multiple uses may be considered during the process of a use classification. However, when one use best fits the description, there's no discussion of other uses included in the final determination. A large domestic animal facility was one use considered during the research for this classification. However, moose are not domestic animals and are not kept for any domestic use included in the Title 21 definition of a large domestic animal facility, which is an establishment for keeping, harboring, riding, boarding, stabling, training, exercising, breeding, or related use of 4 or more large domestic animals and the associated structures such as a paddock or stable. This use was dismissed from consideration
Excuse me.
Sorry.
In this part of the proceedings, it's just a brief outline, and you'll get a chance after the applicant to give your full presentation.
My apologies. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry. So next, I need to talk about the procedure to be followed this evening. The procedure by which the public may speak to the board is as follows. After the staff presentation is complete on a public hearing items, the chair will ask for the applicant to state their case. The applicant, including all of his or her representatives, has 10 minutes for their presentation and may reserve time for rebuttal at the end of the public hearing. Throughout the proceedings, the burden of proof rests upon the applicant, who must convince the board by a preponderance of evidence that the appeal should be granted. A concurring vote of a majority of the fully constituted membership of the board, minus those excused by conflicts of interest, shall be required to grant an appeal. On conclusion of the applicant's presentation, the board members and the staff may then direct questions to the applicant through the chair. The chair will then open the hearing to public testimony on the issue. Persons who wish to testify will follow the timeline limits established in the rules of procedure. Representative of groups, community councils, PTAs have 5 minutes and individuals have 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the board. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the board. Time is kept by the secretary. The display at the front will be green to within 1 minute of the time allowed and then turn yellow. At this time, you should begin to sum up your testimony. At the end of the time, the light will turn red and a tone will sound. An individual may have appeal rights related to any action the Zoning Board of Examiners and Appeals takes. The parties have 30 days from the date of mailing or other distribution of the decision to file an appeal to Superior Court. Okay, so next we will hear from the appellant. Will the appellant or the appellant's representative please come forward and state and spell your name for the record?
This is on.
There you
Okay,
go.
there we go. My name is Rebecca Lipson, REBECCA-LIPSON. I'm from the law firm of Ashburn and Mason, and I'm here representing the appellant. And I would like to reserve whatever time I don't use for rebuttal purposes.
Please state your case.
Thank you. Good evening. Moose Mama's burden tonight is to prove our appeal should be granted by a preponderance of the evidence. That's the lowest standard of proof the legal system has. If you were sitting on a civil jury case and a state court judge would advise you that preponderance of the evidence means something is more likely true than not true. If you believe that there is a greater than 50% chance that it is true, 51% probability is enough. No more is required. So here, if you think it's more likely true than not true, that longtime municipal use determination expert, Sonnet Calhoun, the Muni's zoning and land use review manager, when left to just reviewing Title 21 and not getting entangled in any neighborhood politics, any municipal politics, that she got it right, then I've met my burden of proof. And you should grant this appeal. That's because Sonnet has already found the use was most similar to the accessory use category for a large domestic animal facility. That's on pages 28 to 31 of your packet. That's been Sonnet's position since she first reviewed the use at a different location back in 2018. This, of course, makes sense since, one, it's not the primary use of the lot, so Sonnet would naturally begin her analysis in the accessory use section of Title 21 when looking at the proposed use. And two, when looking at the proposed use, she would see that the keeping of moose calves is most similar in function to the keeping of horse calves or cow calves. I'm doing this case pro bono. I'm not paid to be here. I'm here because when I saw Sonnet's correspondence with Moose Mamas approving the use and then subsequent canned denial, it just didn't sit right. That maybe the planning department wasn't making their determination solely on the basis of Title 21. And so I reached out to Sonnet and Dave to find out what was going on. I very much respect our planning department. I really enjoy working closely on cases with them. I explained to Dave and Sonnet that I was confused by the sudden switch in municipal position. That's pages 33 and 34 of your packet. I asked to talk, to get an explanation, and hopefully avoid wasting everyone's time with an appeal. To my surprise, the correspondence I received was from Assistant Municipal Attorney Quincy Arms, again, someone I enjoy working with, but Quincy refused to provide any explanation, saying the only option was to appeal. That's pages 32 and 33. In my professional experience, that's not how the municipality normally does business. It's inefficient, it's ineffective, and it's not a transparent decision-making process. Rather, it suggests, as does the very scanty staff's decision supporting this determination, that the municipal position isn't based on staff's expert analysis, but might be a policy directive from elsewhere. And I'm not asking you to sit here and put Sonnet in a hot seat because I'm sure the official municipal position is that the staff memo speaks for itself and it's your job as the ZEBA board to decide this case. And that's true. But this is a really important decision. If you don't grant this appeal tonight, then you're not just saying Moose Mamas can't operate at this one specific location. You're saying Moose Mamas can't go back to any of its prior locations. You're saying that this program is entirely disallowed in the Anchorage Bowl, despite its successful operation within a 2-mile radius of the proposed site for the past 7 years. Because B3 and I-1 property in the municipality is entirely unsuitable for the temporary keeping of moose calves. That activity intrinsically requires a natural setting. You can't operate Moose Mamas from the Elmore Animal Control Facility. You can't operate it out of a vet office off the Seward Highway. And that's where the municipality allows animal shelters, which makes sense because by definition, animal shelters are someplace that has client services, members of the public are going in and out, in and out. That's where those activities should take place. But that's not the essence of the temporary use proposed by Moose Mamas. During my presentation, I'll have 3 witnesses, and it appears there's lots of members of the public who also wish to testify, and I'll reserve the rest of my time for rebuttal.
You have 5 minutes. Are there any questions of the appellant? by the board members? Thank you. Are there any questions of the appellant by the staff? She indicates no. Now, will the staff please give your presentation?
Thank you, Madam Chair. When planning staff receives a request for a use classification, they review information provided by the applicant, along with other publicly available information, and then determine which use type best matches the proposed use. Multiple uses may be considered during the process of use classification. However, when one use best fits a type description, there is no discussion of other uses included in the final determination. A large domestic animal facility was one use considered during the research for this classification. However, moose are not domestic animals and are not kept for any domestic use included in the Title 21 definition of a large domestic animal facility, which is an establishment for keeping, harboring, riding, boarding, stabling, training, exercising, breeding, or related use of 4 or more large domestic animals, and the associated structures such as a paddock or stable. This use was dismissed from consideration because the activities involved with keeping wild moose do not meet this definition. The information provided by the applicant and research from the organization's website indicates this use is administered by a nonprofit organization whose mission is to rescue abandoned wild moose calves and rehabilitate them in preparation for reintroduction to the wild. The animals that are brought to the facility are not bred for any domestic use, and they are not intended to be domesticated. They are fed, given medical care as necessary, and prepared to be rehomed back into the wild where they resume their lives without additional human interaction. Per Title 21, Chapter 5 use definitions, an animal shelter is a facility used to house or contain stray, homeless, abandoned, or unwanted animals, and that is owned, operated, or maintained by a public or nonprofit organization devoted to the welfare, protection, and humane treatment of animals. This term shall not include residences where animals are fostered while awaiting adoption. This use description fits the activities of the proposed use as described in the applicant's narrative, as well as advertised on the organization's website. Planning staff carefully considered information about the use of the facility and determined that the proposed use is an animal shelter. When planning staff determines the use type that most resembles the activities proposed and assigns a use classification, then applicable use regulations can be considered, including whether the use is a principal or accessory use and what zoning district the use is permitted in. The animal shelter use type is not listed as an accessory use in Title 21. Therefore, wherever it is located, it becomes principal use, and it must be a permitted use in the zoning district where it's intended to be located. The Planning Department supports the use classification for an animal shelter as it is written and recommends denial of this appeal. I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Are there any questions of staff by the board members?
I do, Madam Chair. Typically with an animal shelter that it would be classified, is there a facility, is it typically just a facility for an animal shelter, or do we see other facilities on residential properties as animal shelters?
An animal shelter would not be allowed as an accessory to a residential. Most residential properties only allow one principal use, and since an animal shelter is a principal use, it would not be allowed in a residential district because it would be a second principal use.
Madam Chair, may I follow up? Another question. Can you be a little more specific at what changed from the original designation? I believe and it was 7 years, I think I heard. What changed from then to today?
So, as I mentioned, there was never a formal use classification of this type submitted for this organization. There were informal discussions with staff, myself included, without looking at the full scope of the use on the site. Additional information provided by the applicant and on the website indicates, staff that is there for the moose mamas. They have interns that are there. They have veterinary services that are provided. And the main thing that was pointed out to me as incorrect is that these are not domestic animals. Moose are wild animals, and the definitions of wild and domestic are very different.
Thank you.
To the chair. Did you guys look at the designation outdoor keeping of animals?
We did look at that. Outdoor keeping of animals applies to 1 to 3 large domestic animals on a lot. Anything more than 3 large domestic animals falls under the large domestic animal facility, either as a principal or accessory use. So it kind of brings us back to that large domestic animal facility, and the same reasons it was not considered for this use type, because it is the same reasons as a large domestic animal facility was not considered.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Are there any questions of the staff by the applicant?
So I have one question, and I want to understand the outdoor keeping of animals. The municipality is relying on, so it's subsection B, 15BI, as the use-specific standard for just domestic animals. Is that the municipality's position?
Yes. If I understood your question correctly.
And so subsection 2 is the following standards apply to the outdoor keeping of all animals except for dogs, domestic cats, and large domestic animals?
Because large domestic animals would be under the large domestic animal facility.
Okay. And sometimes this is why attorneys like talking with other attorneys, but the following standards apply to the outdoor keeping of all animals except for dogs, domestic cats, and large domestic animals. So is it the municipality's position, I guess, what is the municipality's position as to what constitutes all animals in the first part of that phrase?
Hi. It's not super clear in here, but in the planning world, everyone that I've spoken to says this is still referring to smaller animals like chickens and other kind of poultry, and maybe even pigs, did we decide? Yeah. Some pigs. So you have to keep scrolling through the rest of the section, and then they start referring to roosters, turkeys, guinea fowl, peacocks, geese. So I'm sorry that it's not clear, but it was never intended to apply to moose.
Okay, so in reading, the following standards apply to the outdoor keeping of all, and then it is fowl and some categories of pigs. Is that the municipal position on this?
So there are different sizes of pigs. There you got little small pigs and you got big hogs. So a big hog would be a large domestic animal. A small pig might be a pet.
Okay, I have no further questions.
Okay, so then now we will open the... That should have been part of your 10 minutes.
I conferred with municipal staff prior to tonight's hearing, and my understanding was that the position was that my witness testimony, as I'm allowed to present a full evidentiary hearing, did not include those witnesses.
That's correct. This is Jessica Willoughby. I'm from the Department of Law. The code actually doesn't say either way, but I did not think on first read that the presentation would include witnesses' testimony, given that the testifiers won't testify in the general open public hearing.
Is there a time allotted for the witnesses?
I don't think that's in code, no. I think it's a place where the chair can make a determination.
I can understand you.
I think it's a place where the chair can make the determination of what's appropriate.
Okay. We're going to take about a 2-minute break. I have to look something up if I'm supposed to make this decision. So we're on a break for 2 minutes. In my reading of the code, and I'm talking specifically about 2112-320, testimony and cross-examination, and this is under the Zoning Board of Examiners and Appeals Rules of Procedure. Testimony of persons appearing before the board shall be limited as follows. The petitioner, including all of his or her representatives, has 10 minutes.
And what I am trying to find is the reference to a full and fair evidentiary hearing before this board. And I believe that is also a requirement for a full and fair evidentiary hearing with cross-examination. And I personally do not know any attorney who can fully cross-examine, fully direct a witness, let alone 3 in 10 minutes. So I am trying to find the reference to the full evidentiary hearing that's required by ZEBA, but I'm preserving on appeal should you decide to continue the hearing without letting me have my witness testimony, and that's certainly your right to do so. So I will abide by whatever the zoning board ultimately determines.
You had 5 minutes left. The proceedings allow for you to be able to question anyone from the public wishing to testify.
I believe the subsection I'm looking at is in the actual Title 21 and 2103-050, and would be in subsection B, appeals to the Zoning Board of Examiners and Appeals. And under subsection B4, scope of review, the Zoning Board of Examiners and Appeals shall conduct a full evidentiary hearing on an appeal and make its decision on the basis of this title, the evidence, and the argument presented. And it is my position that I'm unable to fully and fairly present my case in the span of 10 minutes of oral presentation and calling of witnesses. However, again, Madam Chair, if that's your position, I respect that and just reserve that point.
This is a question for the attorney, Ms. Willoughby.
Sure. So I am looking at the Code of Regulation. The Code of Regulation does set timelines for the petitioner, for individuals. It also says that the board may extend the time period for any person where it deems the additional testimony to be new and necessary to its decision on the case. I don't think it's crystal clear whether witnesses are part of the 10 minutes. But given that if a petitioner were to call 5 people to testify, and in general public testimony, those 5 people would have 3 minutes each, that would be 15 minutes. So it does seem difficult for a petitioner to achieve a full evidentiary hearing, including so many witnesses in 10 minutes. I think this is an area where the code leaves room for the board's discretion as to what's reasonable given the situation. So I think 3 to 5 minutes per witness for 3 witnesses isn't unreasonable. Understanding that those folks are relevant to the subject matter.
Okay, then, as chair, I will allow you to, you have 3 witnesses to call, and I will give you 3 minutes, 5 minutes for each of the 3 witnesses. 5 minutes each.
I understand and appreciate the consideration, and I've made my point for the record. Thank you. May I call my first witness? Okay. As a trial run for how fast I can do this, I'm going to call out of order, and Darren, would you please come up?
Good evening.
State your name and spell it for the record, please.
Darren Applebury, Darin Applebury.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, do you live...
You have to speak into the mic. You're going to
Okay.
get close.
Sir, do you live at a single-family residence at 6673 Shangri-La Circle?
Yes.
Do you own that residence?
Yes, I do.
How long have you lived there?
16 years.
Was it custom built for you?
Yes, it was.
Do you consider it to be your primary residence?
Yes, I do.
Based on property records, zoned R10 low-density residential Alpine Slope District and 2.24 acres. Does that sound accurate?
That's correct.
When the May 25th email from Sonnet was received letting you know that Moose Mamas could have up to 9 moose at your property, did you personally incur expenses associated with that approval?
Yes, I have.
How much roughly, if you know?
$26,000.
Would you have incurred that $26,000 of work had you known you weren't going to be able to have moose at your residence?
No.
Okay. And for the board, can you give just a quick general description of what those costs included?
Putting in a driveway to access from the lower property, excavation, tearing out some of the alders, bringing in some material, contractor to equipment, gas, culverts, that sort of thing.
And what is your understanding of how long the duration of the actual keeping of moose on your property would be in any given year?
4 months, 5 months.
Okay, and roughly, do you recall is that May through September?
Usually the calves start coming in early May, and then they're released usually September 1st.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
And we have a board member who has a question.
I'm sorry.
Through the chair, just real quick, before you began all your construction and spent $26,000, did you go to the planning staff and ask them if the use was permitted?
There was a verbal with the city prior to actually getting that in writing. We were told that we had to actually ask the neighbors if it was allowable, which was approved. And then before I went and started that, I wanted to make sure, and then that's when it was given in writing.
Who'd you talk to at the meeting? The planning staff?
What's that?
Did you talk to the planning staff?
I don't remember the person, but whoever at the end when we got it in writing was Sonnet. But it was a verbal, because they made us, I can't remember who I talked to, but we had to ask the direct neighbor if we had more than 4 moose. It was a kind of, and I don't understand the verbology of what was given, but in the past, when we were at just down the street at Wishsong, we could only have 5 on the property, but if the neighbor agreed that they could have their 5, we could have 10. So I don't understand that, but it was just a verbal thing that this has been going on for like 8 years with the city of doing moose. So this is everyone. It's funny that, in my opinion, the city's been known about all of this, and they've given approval for all of this, and telling us what to do. But for some reason, this year was, you need to fill out an application.
Well, that's why I'm kind of wondering who you talked to. I mean,
I'm sorry, and I'm sorry, sir. I never took down that name.
Thanks.
I'd like to call Keith as my next witness. He is present or... Or Tammy, either Keith or Tammy. I'm sorry, I don't know your last name.
Through the chair. I just wanted to clarify whether the department wanted to cross-examine the witness before we moved on to the next witness. Okay, the department's indicating no questions. I'm sorry about the interruption.
Yeah.
Doman, same last name.
Okay. And you will have to state and spell it, so.
Okay. Actually, my legal name is Tamra.
Wait, I need to ask if you were sworn in.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
First name is Tamra, T-A-M-A-R-A, Doman, D-O-H-M-E-N.
Thank you. Ms. Doman, where do you live?
I live at 3509 Shandy Court.
In the past, have you, is your was your address in close proximity to former Moose Mama's location?
Yes.
Can you describe for the board how close you were, where you were in relation?
Oh, probably a couple 100 feet from the Moose Mama's location the last couple years.
And were you across the street or next to it or just really
Next
close?
to it,
Okay.
yeah, kind of side by side.
Okay. In your personal experience, did the Moose Mama's activities result in any noticeable increase in traffic?
No.
Did it result in any increase in noise?
No.
And this is a big one. Did you notice any increase in bear activity?
No more than we've ever had the last 16 years.
In your personal experience, and how many years do you know roughly were you next to?
About 2.5 years.
Okay. Did the Moose Mama's activities change the residential character of your neighborhood?
No, actually nobody even knew they were there.
And that goes to my next question, which so the characterization has been made by Moose Mamas that it's not open to the public. Does that seem accurate to you?
Yes, that's very accurate.
Okay. Did it create any adverse impacts in your experience as a neighbor?
No, it was actually a joy to have them next to us.
So, anticipating my next, any reason you would not welcome Moose Mamas back into your immediate neighborhood?
Oh, no, I would have them back in a heartbeat. We miss them.
And that is all of my questions. I'm doing pretty good on time for this witness.
Any
So-
question by the board members for this witness? Dave Hale.
To the chair. I was just curious about how all of these are pertain to the use of the property, and specifically to Title 21. How does it change it? If it's really noisy, how is that going to change the code, is what I'm wondering.
One of the board's obligations tonight is to determine, let me make sure I have my exact language. So in making any use determination, you have to look at, I believe it's 11 factors, 12 factors. And the 12th factor is the impact on adjacent properties created by the proposed use, that it will not be greater than the other uses in the zoning district. So I anticipate this board is going to hear a lot about bear activity and noise and traffic concerns. So I think it is relevant to your 12th factor.
Mr. Flynn?
I remove myself.
Okay. Oh, does the staff have any questions of this witness?
My apologies, could you repeat the question?
Does the staff have any questions for this witness?
No, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, and Dana, will you come up as my last witness? State your name for the record.
Dana DiBernardi, DANADEBERNARDI.
Have you been sworn in?
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead.
Okay. Dana, are you the founder of Moose Mamas?
Yes.
Can you, because I want to use my time wisely, speak to the distinction in practical terms between the difference of moose calves and a cow calf or a horse calf, for instance, like odor, feces odor, food odor, etc.?
Well, they both can actually be considered domestic, but that can be another issue. But as far as moose calves compared to other livestock calves, moose are a lot less smellier. They're actually born almost odorless as a defense and survival mechanism. Their feces are small, tiny little pellets that's picked up throughout the day, put in sealed buckets and disposed of daily, and they don't make as much noise.
Do you have, is there sufficient parking on the residential lot to accommodate any intern who might park there temporarily or any vet who might visit temporarily? Would anyone need to park on the street?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
Plenty of space.
And then, can you describe the current level of security around the pens? Because there's a representation in the staff packet of an 8-foot-high fence with electrical tape. Is that an accurate description?
The panels are 10 feet wide, 8 feet tall, that break together and link together to form whatever shape you want, kind of like a dog kennel. And we do have a 3-tape electrical fence, about 3.5, 4 feet high, that goes around the perimeter.
There is no way I will be able to go through any past bear incident in my remaining time with you. Can you speak to whether since 2017 there has been any bear interaction that has gotten past any of your triple lines of defense?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Based on past, in these 7 or 8 years that you've been operating on the hillside, has your security of your pens and overall process, has that matured?
Absolutely. Since 2016, 17, every year always gets better. We always add, with new technology coming out. 5 years ago, not everyone had Blink or all these nice cameras. We also have a better electric fence. Camera system alerts me night and day if any movement.
How frequently do moose arrive and depart from the site?
There's only a few weeks of rescuing with Department of Fish and Game, typically at the beginning of June, actually, until July 4th is the only time you can actually rescue calves in the state. After that, they're there for 3 more months until we leave once with them for release.
So you leave once for release. Yeah. Why, in this case, you didn't go around alerting your neighbors of what you were planning on doing, is that correct?
I think Darren maybe talked to a couple. I was trying to hurry and get ready for moose to be born.
Is there a reason why you wouldn't go around publicizing your activities?
One, the Department of Fish and Game really frowns on anyone knowing where we're at because they are release animals. We don't really like people driving around and getting a sneak peek at them, which a lot of people can't help themselves if they know where we're at.
And there's some photos and supplemental information providing your packet that where you can see onto the property, see the pens. When standing on the street and not trespassing onto the lot lines, can you see the enclosures?
You may be able to see maybe the top of one fence, but you would never be able to see the calves.
Okay. And then, I don't know if any board members have questions.
Does any board member have a question for this witness?
How are the calves transported to and from your location?
In the back of my Suburban in a large dog kennel.
What would you call, through the chair, Dana, what would you classify the animals? A domestic?
So there is a difference between domestic and domesticated, as far as there's a domesticated are animals that have actually been for thousands of years bred to be domesticated. Domestic, it can actually mean the verbiage of any animal that is taken out of the wild and in captivity. Is it considered a domestic animal? It can actually be put back into the wild and be reintroduced to the wild. That's what we do.
Through the chair, that was my next question, is the ultimate goal to get them back in the wild?
Absolutely. Absolutely, that's why we do it. We fly them across the inlet in places, remote locations in Alaska where they don't get hit on roads like their mothers.
Thank you.
Mr. Flynn?
Oh, hi. Question is, you don't ever keep any of the calves past I think it was 4 to 5 months? They're never kept there past that?
Absolutely not. We've, like I said, they are typically come to us about the beginning of June. All moose calves drop within 2 weeks of each other across the state. We sometimes have released as soon as mid-August, but sometimes as late as late September, depending how big and healthy they are.
And if there was one that was injured, would that be put into sort of another location, either fishing game or veterinary, but off your location?
Depending on the injury, if it's some kind of infection or that could affect the other calves, it would be put in quarantine away from the other calves, which we do have a quarantine pen just in case. That's kind of off to the side. But generally, when they have an injury, moose are pretty resilient and healthy, and we just nurse them back to health.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Hale?
To the chair, thank you. Just quick question, how many of these moose calves do you typically have? I was looking for it in here, I didn't quite see it. How many do you typically have on site?
It's anywhere from 2 to 11 is what we've had before, and I think what Mr. Appleberry was trying to say earlier as far as the allotment that we've had through the muni is some locations we've actually been able to have 5, we're told, but if we ask our surrounding neighbors for their allotment for their large animals, they can, if they don't have large animals, we can use their property line, basically, however many acres they have, and have their allotment. That's how we could get up to 15 at our last location, which we never had that many, but that's what he was referring to. But typically, 6 is an average, maybe.
Thanks. Just as a follow-up to staff, I guess I have a question for you guys. The large animal is limited to 1 to 3 animals, right? Is that what the definition says?
That would be for the outdoor keeping of animals. A large domestic animal facility is, 4 or more animals. You have to have a lot size of minimum of 40,000 square feet. And then an additional 10,000 square feet per domestic animal after that.
So you can have more than 3 for outdoor keeping of animals?
No, under a large domestic animal facility, you could have more. Outdoor
Okay.
keeping of animals would only apply to 1 to 3.
Okay, so I'm not talking about domestic animals, so I'd be talking about the outdoor keeping of animals. It's 1 to 3 per, lot?
Yes, if you have a lot greater than 20,000 square
So there's
feet.
no neighborhood sharing of
No,
allocations?
no.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions? Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Savina?
Had you asked any of the neighboring homes now about using their allotment like you had in the past? in Bear Valley?
I didn't at this location because of our original determination of having 9 calves. We typically don't get more than that, and I was told verbally if it ever got to that, there's a process that we can go and ask, and there are favorable neighbors that live right adjacent to us that would probably be more than in favor, so we just didn't get that far.
Mr. Flynn?
Thank you. I just had a follow-up question with staff. Just to be clear, Sonnet, you said, is it 1 per 10,000 square feet per lot, or is it 1 per lot?
So are you asking about outdoor keeping of animals or
Correct.
large okay.
Sorry, from Dale's question.
Because they're two different uses. So the outdoor keeping of animals would apply to 1 to 3 large domestic animals. Anything more than 3 large domestic animals would fall under a large domestic animal facility and would not be considered outdoor keeping of animals.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I have no idea where we are. Okay. Now, we will open the public hearing. Is there anyone from the public wishing to testify in this case? Please come forward. State and spell your name for the record, please. Wait, you have to turn on your mic. There you go.
My name is Fred Brown. I am the president of the Farview Place Homeowners Association. I reside at 16364 Farview Place, Anchorage, Alaska.
Have you been sworn in?
Yes.
Go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. So, as a preliminary matter, I'd like to put on the record, since we're preparing for appeal, that we object to the presentation of this appeal by the Moose Mamas. Municipal Code 21.03.050B2 says that appeals to the Board of Examiners and Appeals may be brought by any party of interest. And if you examine the appellate documents, this is brought forward by Moose Mamas. And there's been no evidence that Moose Mamas is the owner of the property. There's no evidence that they have a lease for the use of that property. And I'll specifically highlight the fact that even though Mr. Appleberry spoke here, Mrs. Appleberry did not. And as you'll see in the documents, the owners of that lot are Mr. and Mrs. Appleberry. So with that, I'll proceed to the merits of the appeal. As mentioned, I'm the president of the Homeowners Association. All the members of the Homeowners Association are either here or, due to COVID, appearing online. But in any case, it's unanimous that the nearby Homeowners Association of Farview Place are opposed to the placement of this facility, and we fully support the planning director's determination to deny the Moose Mamas permit, and we ask that it be affirmed by the board. We also take seriously, as I mentioned earlier, the pledge of the Moose Mamas founder to stop at no point until she gets to final determination, and so we're preparing for appeal, and so we thank the staff for the time and attention they've given to make sure that our record is complete. I will just mention that we submitted our documents on Tuesday, and we noticed yesterday that there were 2 documents missing. And the staff acknowledged that this was accidentally left out, and this morning we saw that they're included. So again, we say thanks to the staff for their diligent attention and cooperation. In your board packet, there is a public comment section. You'll find the last 125 pages were the pages that we submitted on Tuesday. And given that I'm unable to condense that 125 pages down to 5 minutes, I'll just summarize quickly the items that are included in the material. The first 12 pages, beginning at the board's PDF page 24, is our HOA letter with a detailed summary of how the Moose Mamas not only violated the Anchorage zoning code and building code sections, but they also violated their own subdivision covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Next, beginning at your PDF page 36, are exhibits supporting our letter. Most of these are photos reflecting building code and other municipal code violations. And by the way, those pictures are all taken from HOA property, and you can visually, clearly see the facility that has been discussed. The next document at PDF page 54 is a plat map including the subject property, which is lot number 16 of the Shangri-La subdivision, and the next 2 pages are the deeds signed by Darren and Jill Appleberry that I described a few moments ago. They purchased lot number 16 of the subdivision, and then the next 18 pages are the Shangri-La subdivision covenants, conditions, restrictions, listing the terms of the Shangri-La owner's private agreement. Notably, the covenants Article 7, Section 9C states simply, no wild animals may be kept on any lot. And we submit this as dispositive of this case if you want to stop right now. But since I still have the floor, let me just quickly mention a couple of other points. The remainder of the board's public comment packet, beginning at PDF page 76, consists of several documents that raise many questionable aspects of the history of the Moose Mamas program. And I don't have time in my remaining 33 seconds to go through all of them, but I hope that you will. And I'll specifically call attention to the comments that were offered in the board packet at earlier in the packet at pages 19 through 21 that were presented by former directors, former board members, and they very well summarize the pages that we have from page 76 through 179. So if you want the short version, look at their 3 pages. Finally, I'll just say that my time is up, and I will stop now, and I simply ask that you affirm the determination of the planning director and direct that the Moose Mamas correct the many code violations detailed in our letter. Thank you.
Are there any questions of the board members, from the board members of this person? Mr. Brown? No. Mr. Brown. Mr. Myers?
Thank you. Through the chair. I also noticed under the fence section of the CC&Rs that no fence shall be erected over 6 feet, and through architectural committee to quality design of workmanship, materials, color, and stain. I would just ask if, as the HOA president, was something submitted for that for approval?
To my knowledge, none has been submitted. Again, that's the Shangri-La subdivision. They would know better, but if you read through those covenants, you can see there are many that have been violated by this construction.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I have a question of staff. Is it the municipality's responsibility to enforce covenants, conditions, and restrictions?
No, the municipality of Anchorage is not party to covenants and restrictions from homeowners associations.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Brown by the staff?
No, thank you.
Any questions of Mr. Brown by the appellant?
Thank you. I have a few through the chair. Mr. Brown, how many, there are 4, is it 4 condos or 4 townhomes in your association total?
The answer is correct. There are 4 individual units within the condominium association.
Thank you. And I believe you testified to this, but you are this subject lot is part of the Shangri-La subdivision, not your subdivision.
As you'll see in the plat map, our subdivision is located immediately to the west. We are lot number 1 of the Ptarmigan Roost subdivision. This facility is directly across and directly adjacent to our subdivision, part of which is separated by a municipal right-of-way.
So I will save that for my rebuttal argument. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to testify? Please come forward. State and spell your name for the record.
There we go. My name is Anthony Henry, Anthony. Last name is Henry, Henry.
Have you been sworn in?
Yes, I have.
Go ahead.
Okay, shall I begin? I live in an adjacent lot, actually. My property actually borders the property in question. I've lived there for about 17 years. The Shangri-La Homeowners Association really has never been activated, though we have covenants. It's never been activated, and there's never been an issue with any kind of enforcement of whatever is in our covenants. And the homeowners in the subdivision chose not to activate the subdivision as far as that goes. His property adjoins directly to mine. It's a corner lot. I'm one of 4 properties that actually share a boundary with it. And I have no issues with that. I can see very little from my property of this place that has been built. Seems to be appropriate. You know, we've had bears in the neighborhood for the 17 years that I've lived there. There's people outside of our subdivision that have had, I think, goats or sheep that will draw bears, but any domestic animal, horses or whatnot, potentially to draw bears, but it's never created a problem within the association or within the neighborhood. We have bears quite regularly at the house, at my house. We have an electric fence on our deck, and it keeps the bears off. The electricity works very well. And I think that they have an electric fence on this enclosure that they have there. So as you know, a neighbor, I don't have any issues with it. I don't see that it causes any problems. I'm not really worried about it. And as far as our association goes, we've never activated it, even though the covenants are there. People have chose not to do it, and everybody seems to get along well in the neighborhood. So no one's asked me to come here and testify. I saw that the notice. I talked to the gentleman when he was building the enclosure this spring, and it's not disrupting us or any of the neighbors that I'm aware of right now. And so we don't have any problems with it. And I think that knowing, and I've interacted with our neighborhood for quite a while and the people within it, and if it did become a problem, I think that they would address those concerns if there were something that was occurring where it was likely to draw bears that were causing problems. But we have bears regularly, and they don't cause any problems with the people. As long as you keep up your trash, keep things together, it doesn't seem to cause a problem. Okay? So, yeah.
Any questions of Mr. Henry by the board members? Any questions of Mr. Henry by the staff?
No, thank you.
By the appellant?
No,
Thank you, Mr. Henry. Anyone else wishing to testify? Please.
Good evening. My name is Kimberly Pettit, Kimberly Pettit.
Have you been sworn in?
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead.
We came here this evening in support of Moose Mamas. We are former neighbors. We lived in a property possibly 2 to 3 years ago that had adjoining corners with Moose Mamas, and we had absolutely no problems. They are very conscientious neighbors. We had no concerns with traffic or odor or increased bear activity. We have pets. We have small children that are frequently at our home, and we had no additional concerns. I just think that seeing the new property that they had built this summer. It was very visually appealing. I noticed there was something happening there, so I went to see what was going on. And I was actually glad to see that they were coming back into the neighborhood. We support their mission, and we think that they are good neighbors, and given the opportunity, they would be able to show that they're good neighbors. That's all I have.
Any questions of Ms. Pennant by the board? Any questions of Ms. Pettit by the staff?
No, thank you.
By the appellant?
Thank you.
Yes.
I just have two quick questions. Did you notice any nuisances generated on the neighboring premises when you were neighbors with Moose Mamas?
No, nothing.
Did the residential character of your neighborhood change?
No, not at all.
No further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Come ahead. State and spell your name for the record, please.
My legal name is Rochelle Plotnick. I go by Rocky Plotnick, Rockplotnick. And I would like to thank you for taking the time to go over this challenging, interesting issue.
I forgot to ask. Have you been sworn in?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You have 3 minutes.
Okay. I wanted to let you know I'm a retired public health educator. I'm a current yoga teacher, and most important to me right now, I'm the grandmother to 2 young girls who lost their mother, my daughter, to breast cancer. I'm one of the homeowners in Farview Place, and Emery and Brielle come to my house on a very regular basis. So I'm asking you respectfully to uphold the decision with the Moose Mamas, and I just outlined the points why I'm asking this. As it's already been stated, we're a residential neighborhood. I want to also emphasize this is a public health and public safety issue, and it's not about politics at all. We have not just my grandchildren, but children, adults who are out walking, riding bikes, being out in the neighborhood. And what I have under my written comments, I have 76 people who are Anchorage residents. Some of them live right there, some do not, but are Anchorage residents who signed a petition saying that they did not approve of this idea. And I might emphasize that because of this, I've been starting to connect with more neighbors, and unfortunately they can't be here tonight because they're family people and they have kids, and I've been hearing of concerns of others. So even though there's just me, my voice is speaking for others who are concerned, who know that we have bear, brown bear and black bear, and are very concerned about whether more bear will be attracted. And even with an electric fence, if the bear can't get in to hurt the moose calves, is the bear going to be angry because it's not getting its tasty meal? So the other thing I wanted to mention, Spruce Terrace Subdivision is a brand new subdivision that Mr. Spinelli is developing. They've got 28 lots, and that is right off of Farview Place. So there's going to be immediate, there's going to be more homes in the very, very near future. I also want to emphasize that there's a lack of support from science-based wildlife management, and my time's about out, and all I'll say is anecdotally, I've heard from biologists and they're not supportive. So that's it. Thank you.
Are there any questions of Ms. Plotnick by the board members? Mr. Flynn?
Do you want my petition? It was not entered in the record.
You can bring it. Okay. She'll put it into evidence.
I did make a copy.
We have a question. Mr. Flynn?
Hi, Rocky. You were towards the end, you were talking about biologists and people you had conferred with. Can you just, I know you ran out of time, can you just confirm where those biologists were from? Were they from the state? Were they federal? Where were they from?
All of the above, and no one wanted to come forward, and I was a little baffled by that, but I respect that. So both federal and current and former state employees, and unfortunately none of it was positive, but I don't want to go on and on. I only want to state what I've learned.
And was that based on moose in general, or was it based on calves?
It was based on moose population, the biologist's knowledge of the moose mamas, and that there were serious concerns and concerns of whether or not it was really needed. And
Okay, so it was more the need versus the actual the location.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions of Ms. Plotnick by the staff?
Ms. Chair.
Oh, what?
Ms. Chair. I had a question. I'm not used to doing it like this. I just want to ask you, did you see the letter, sorry, did you see the letter in the supplemental comment packet by Kit Cunningham at all?
I didn't read every letter in there.
Okay.
Could you maybe refresh my memory which one that's about?
I don't blame you for not reading every letter. There's a lot of letters in here. But it is a biological contractor, an independent biological contractor who seems pretty decently credentialed, who didn't raise any concerns. I just want to point it out.
So, by the staff?
No, thank you.
By the appellant?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Plotnick.
You ready, Madam Chair?
Have you been sworn in?
Yes, I have.
Would you please state and spell your name for the record?
My name is John Sturgeon, spelled S-T-U-R-G-E-O-N.
Go ahead.
I have been a resident of Alaska for over 50, or Anchorage for over 50 years. I'm currently president of Safari Club International, Alaska chapter. We have about 600 members, and we support what Moose Mamas is doing. Some quick points. If Moose Mamas didn't take in these calves...
Before you continue, are you speaking on behalf of them?
Yes, I am. I'm the president.
All right, so you have 5 minutes.
Okay. We have 600 members across the state, and we support what the Moose Mamas has been doing. We have, you got to remember that if these calves were not brought in by Moose Mamas, they'd be euthanized, they'd be killed. I don't think anybody wants to see that. This is also a volunteer organization. Nowadays, you folks are all volunteers. It's hard to find people willing to do this, and I think it's a very difficult program that they have, and I think they should be supported. This is they do have a permit from Fish and Game, as I understand it. So I think that's the question we had earlier, was this something approved by Fish and Game, and as far as I understand it, it is. Also, I think that this board represents the citizens like me and other citizens out here. It gives us a chance to kind of talk directly to our fellow citizens. Sometimes the bureaucrats read things pretty tight, and I think that these boards have some discretion to solve problems. Personally, I had a beef with the federal government about 13 years ago on navigable waters. Took 13 years, $1.6 million, and 2 unanimous opinions from the U.S. Supreme Court. I don't think the average citizen should have to go through that. With boards like this that citizens can talk to directly and present our problems and say, you know, there is some discretion here. These calves are only in here in the facilities for 4 months. It's not a very long time. They're doing a great service for the community, and I would think that there'd be enough latitude that the board would approve the use of this facility for raising moose calves. So I thank you very much for the time to testify.
Are there any questions of Mr. Sturgeon from the board members? Ms. Sabina?
I guess, so you said the facilities are only in use for 4 months. So at the end of 4 months, is everything taken down and cleaned up, and then it's put back?
Through the chair, I don't know the answer to that, but the calves are only there for 4 months. It's not like they're there for the whole year. And I live on a hillside, and I have moose go through my yard about every 2 or 3 days. And I live right on Rabbit Creek, and I have bears come through my yard. So having moose calves for 4 months on a hillside is something that's not real kind of unusual. And they seem to be at home up there, so it's a good thing, I think. Any other questions?
Mr. Myers?
Mr. Sturgis, would you consider this an animal shelter?
I'm not an attorney. I couldn't answer that question.
Okay.
Sorry.
Any questions of Mr. Sturgeon by the staff?
Well, appreciate the time to testify. And,
wait, no, hold on.
Oh, we got a question?
No, thank you.
By the appellant.
No question. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and thanks for the volunteer work you guys do to do this. This is commendable. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to testify? Come forward.
I'm not sworn in.
Okay.
My name's Keith Doman. Would you like to swear me in?
I would love to swear you in. Do you solemnly swear to affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth?
Absolutely. Yes.
There you go. And are you testifying as an individual?
I am.
Okay. You have 3 minutes. Could you state and spell your name for the record?
My family's owned...
Wait, could you state and spell your name?
Oh, yeah. Keith Doman, Keithdohmen.
Thank you.
My family's owned the property next to Moose Mama's since the 60s. My dad lived there. I grew up there. When they moved into the neighborhood next door, I was a little apprehensive. You know, I didn't know what was going to happen. But in all the time previous to that, we've had moose calves in our yard. They would give birth in the woods, and the mom would bring the baby into the yard and lick him and take care of him. I mean, it's like, I called it our sanctuary, our moose sanctuary. We got bears, we got moose. We got the same 3 bears we have every year. When they moved in, they put up their fence, they put up their electric fence. I watched everything. It was 2020. I own a business here. I work for the municipality. I work for Mark Littlefield out in Eagle River. I've had that contract for 7 years. I was really impressed with these people. In 2020, I didn't work because my wife was susceptible to COVID. And so every day I was there. I seen everything that happened. It was the most professional thing I ever seen. The family came together. The interns came from the States. It helped them become vets. The program goes further than just cute moose, you know. I was there for the release. I was there when they brought a 4-day-old calf to the property, and I watched it grow up. I watched them release it. It was amazing. There was no bear problem whatsoever. I had cameras everywhere, same bears. It's a good program. I want you to picture in your mind what would happen if the program wasn't there. You know what they do? They shoot the baby moose. Okay? It's giving them a second chance. If these people if they would give them a chance, they would see it was the best thing that has happened to our neighborhood since I've been there. We've had people with horses. They stink. These things didn't stink. You know, we had more problems with horses than any other animal. My sister had 3. They always got out. We're always catching them. This wasn't the problem. This was policed. I was impressed. And after I got to know these people, they became my family. And I'm real proud of all of them, whether this works out for them or not. And I would give them my property anytime to put their program up and running. They can use my place.
Your time is up. Thank you. Are there any questions of Mr. Dolman by the board members? Mr. Myers? Did I not? Okay, sorry. Any question? Mr. Flint?
Mr. Dolan, can you just clarify, you're a former neighbor or a current neighbor?
Yeah, former neighbor.
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear that in the beginning.
Yeah, last year,
Okay.
year before that. Started in 2020.
Okay.
And I am sorry they left. It was a sad day.
Any other questions by the board members? Any questions by the staff?
No, thank you.
By the appellant? No, thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dolman. Anyone else wishing to testify? Please come forward. Have you been sworn?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Please state and spell your name for the record, please.
Okay. My name is Ann Brown. I'm a member of the Farview Place Homeowners Association. I've been thinking about how best to use the 3 minutes I would have today. I've heard a lot of comments about the character of those who operate the Moose Mamas organization, and their record is replete with references to show that they are not of good character. They lack the capacity for truthfulness and veracity. And I'm not going to go into every instance in the record, but I think despite that, and despite the mission of the Moose Mamas organization, what I wanted to point out is that the only relevant things for you to consider are whether the Moose Mamas are operating an animal shelter in a residential neighborhood in violation of the municipal code. And also I wanted to point out, I think there was a question from the board here as to whether private agreements or HOA covenants can be enforced by the municipality. Whether or not they can be enforced, the municipal code recognizes that private agreements can enforce more restrictive conditions on lot owners than those included in the zoning code, and that is Code Section 2101060B. In this case, the Shangri-La Estates covenants, and I would beg to differ with the gentleman who said they never activated their covenants. Those covenants are in effect. States clearly that, quote, no wild animals may be kept on any lot. That line is dispositive of this matter, and really nothing else needs to be said on that score. Moose are wild animals. The planning director's determination should be affirmed by the board, and any emotional appeals about baby moose and how wonderful the Moose Mamas organization is are simply irrelevant. Thank you.
Are there any questions of Ms. Brown by the board members?
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, Ms. Brown, what is the process in purchasing a home in this subdivision under the covenants of this agreement that people are made aware of before it's final?
My understanding is that when lots are purchased or homes are purchased, that the covenants, the HOA covenants, are given to them by the HOA, and I believe that is the developer of the HOA.
Do you recall the process when you purchased your home and the...
I am a member of the Farview Place Homeowners Association. The municipal zoning code applies to my HOA and the Shangri-La HOA, but I am in a different HOA.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Romerdahl.
Thanks. Through the chair, are you aware of any notice or action from the Shangri-La Homeowners Association to the appellant regarding the activities?
I am aware that action is being planned by the Shangri-La Homeowners Association.
I guess, can I follow up?
Go ahead.
Do you any elaboration on what action is pending, or?
I believe the homeowners in Shangri-La are not happy with the Moose Mama's operation. They also aren't happy with some other animals that are kept there in violation of covenants, and I believe that they have been discussing how to address that. And I believe they will take action based on what I've seen.
Mr. Hale.
Just a quick point of clarification. These CCRs are recorded, so when you buy the property, it's going to show up in a title report. So if you're going to buy a house up there, you're going to get a copy of these with your as-built and any other documents that are applicable to your property. The question is a matter of enforcement, and the enforcement is suing people. That's pretty much all you can do. If you don't have an active society that can police the place and you're paying dues to, all you can do is sue people. So that's why none of this is ever enforced.
Correct. I wasn't implying that you would enforce it, and those restrictive covenants were recorded on December 16, 2002, as you suggest. And they do apply to the Shangri-La Estates lot number 16, which is the subject of the hearing today.
Any other questions from the board members? Okay, seeing none, any questions? Ms. Brown? By the staff?
No, thank you.
By the appellant?
I do. Can I share the mic? So to clarify, you do not live in the Shangri-La subdivision where this subject property is?
I live directly downhill from the lot at issue. We share a, I think I answered that. We share a steep hill.
Only question on cross-examination for you. And I believe that is
well, if you're trying to restrict what I'm saying to the board.
I am permitted to cross-examine my witness, and typically the attorney can direct a question, and I don't mean to be rude. I'm in a full week of jury trial right now, but when the person responding to your question answers the question, you may continue on. I believe she was giving a narrative response, which is not what I asked. I asked a yes or no question. May I proceed?
You may.
Thank you. Are you aware that currently there are no dues in the Shangri-La subdivision where lot 16 is?
What I'm aware of is that once those covenants are recorded, and they have not been abandoned, and the owner and the developer has affirmed to us that it has not been abandoned, that those are enforceable covenants, whether they collect dues or not.
Do you personally have standing to bring any action against a homeowner in another subdivision? Please just answer if you know.
I am not in a position to do that. I don't have standing, but what I testified to is that those who do have standing are planning action.
Can I inquire as to who those individuals are?
There are I believe there are in excess of 15 people who've been discussing this, and I did not bring a list of their names. But I'm sure we can provide them to you if you would leave the record open.
No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Brown. Anyone else wishing to testify? Have you been sworn in?
I have not.
Okay. Allow me. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth?
I do.
Please state and spell your name for the record.
My name is Erica Lapham, E-R-I-C-A-L-A-P-H-A-M. I was an intern in 2021, and I ended up quitting my job and moving up to Alaska to be a part of Moose Mamas. When we were in discussions of should we move to the Shangri-La place, we didn't want to do any unnecessary work, and so we made sure that everything was in order before we started the movement process. And so I am disappointed in trying to understand how this happens and how your system works, and you just take back what you said you were going to do, because if you would have said no in the first place, we wouldn't have moved everything up there. And we worked really hard. We spent lots of time. And so it's just, I'm confused and heartbroken because we're just trying to save the moose, which is an Alaskan resource, and the goal is to provide for hunters, tourists, all the people that care about the moose. It's what brought me to Alaska. I don't do things lightly. I don't make decisions lightly. And to give everything I have to Moose Mamas and the people that I met, like Keith said, they became my family, and it's why I'm here. And so the bottom line is we had permission. We wouldn't do it if we didn't have permission, and now all of a sudden I came up here to do the moose, and we didn't have the moose, and instead I'm hearing about him dying and getting shot. So I just ask that you would figure out a way to make it happen, because it's an important part of what Alaska is about.
Are there any questions of Ms. Lapham by the board members? Mr. Flynn?
Hi. You said you were told. Were you personally told by someone from the municipality, or were you speaking for someone else?
We got the email. I'm just talking about the email.
Can you specify who you mean by we?
Moose Mamas.
Okay.
In talking with Dana, in preparations, she had gotten the email from Sonnet saying that we had permission to do it, so we made plans to move forward.
But did you physically see the email?
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other question by the board members? Seeing none, any questions from staff of Ms. Lapham?
No, thank you.
And any questions by the appellant? Thank you. Anyone else wishing to testify?
Good evening.
Have you been sworn in?
I have.
Please state and spell your name for the record.
My name is Niles Woods, Niles Woods.
Are you speaking as an individual or a member of a group?
Yes, individual.
Okay, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Dear Zoning Board of Examiners and Appeals, good evening. Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Niles Woods, as you know, and my wife and I have lived at Farview Place condominiums for the past 11 years. And we're directly west of the facility in question tonight at 6673 Shangri-La Circle. Before we moved to our current home in 2011, we looked at the zoning of all the properties surrounding our condominium complex. In all directions, every lot was zoned residential. We were looking for a quiet, homogeneous, hillside neighborhood, and the condominiums in which we are currently living met our requirements. In the fall of 2018, Darren Appleberry, one of the co-owners of the property at 6673 Shangri-La Circle, in an effort to expand his parking area on his property, dumped a substantial amount of fill dirt onto our condominium association's property. Darren stated that he was unaware of the correct property line between our properties. With the assistance of the City of Anchorage, we were able to show Darren where the correct property line was located. He then removed the fill dirt he incorrectly placed on our property. Then, this summer, Darren is again expanding his parking area on his property, and again dumped fill dirt onto our condominium's property in the same location as before. Did Darren not know where the property line was? Hence, Darren Appleberry, president of Moose Mamas, has not earned the trust of the Farview Place condominium owners. I don't think that you will rule in favor of Moose Mamas tonight, but if you did, it would in essence change the zoning for the property at 6673 Shangri-La Circle from residential to commercial or industrial. This would create a gross inconsistency within our quiet residential neighborhood. Having the Moose Mamas Wild Game Preserve in our neighborhood is against municipal code. It would attract wild predators, and it would lower the property values of the surrounding neighborhood. I strongly recommend that you deny a denial of the Moose Mamas' appeal to have their facility located at 6673 Shangri-La Circle. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions of Mr. Woods by the board members? Any questions of Mr. Woods by the staff?
No, thank you.
By the appellant? No, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Woods. Anyone else wishing to testify? Have you been sworn in?
I have not.
Okay, allow me. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth?
Yes, I do.
Please state and spell your name for the record.
Thank you. My name is Suzanne Camellas, S-U-S-A-N-N-E. Last name is C-O-M-E-L-L-A-S. And I am a former neighbor of Moose Mamas. They were directly to my south, and I had a view of their corral that they kept the moose in. They were the best neighbors. I've lived on the hillside for 45 years. I did not see any increased bear activity, and I'm very familiar with that neighborhood, having run up and down those roads for the last 40 years. They were great neighbors, and I just don't I was very reluctant about it when I first heard about it, but the opportunity to have this facility in my neighborhood, bar none, has been a great experience. The opportunity to have this facility in Anchorage, where there is research being conducted on a resource that we all use, moose, is really kind of interesting. It's like having a controlled National Geographic moment right near you. As far as the facility goes, I would feel comfortable sleeping on the bare ground inside that pen with all the bear that run up and down this hillside. It is that secure, and they have cameras. As far as the people who run the place, they bring in volunteers. What are volunteers but helpful people in a neighborhood? More eyes. What else could a neighbor bring? The facility is only in operation for 4 or 5 months out of the year. These creatures are calm like moose, or like horse foals. I was raised in upstate New York. We had horses. They're small, they're calm, they're treated well, they have no reason to be aggressive. I've seen horses more aggressive than this. As far as horses go, my neighbors did have horses. The runoff from horses from a year-round facility is incredible, even if you are immaculate about picking them up, because they urinate.
This facility was very clean. I did not notice any kind of increase in bugs, no increase in traffic. I was so sad to see them go. I've never, you know, it's just a wonderful opportunity. It's like a complete description of what Alaska is about, different things. And if there was a kid in the neighborhood who wanted to pad their college resume with volunteering at a moose facility in Alaska, I can tell you right now, any college recruiter would not turn that opportunity down. They would read that whole resume. I just don't see the downside. I can understand the fear about having an unusual thing in your neighborhood.
Your time is up.
But I don't see the downside.
Any question of this by the board? No? Any questions by the staff?
No, thank you.
Any questions by the appellant? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to testify? Have you been sworn in?
I have you.
You have or have not?
I have, yes.
Okay. Please state and spell your name for the record.
My name is Trond Jensen, Trond Jensen.
Go ahead.
So my wife, Cindy Jensen, has submitted a detailed testimony in the record. I just want to bring out one point about the safety. Moose Mamas and their attorney has spoken a lot about the safety. I want to bring out one point, and that is that Moose Mamas founder is well aware that there's a risk as evidenced in June of 17 when a grizzly attacked an orphaned moose being sheltered by their operation. According to Dana, her own words, in a videoed interview, she said they tried to do everything they could to scare the bear away. Long story short, the encounter ultimately led to Dana shooting and killing the bear. After an investigation into the shooting, in 2018, Dana was subsequently charged with unsworn falsification and tampering with public record. We do not need this type of operation in the neighborhood. So in conclusion, just please uphold your initial denial of Moose Mama's request. Thank you for your time.
Any questions of Mr. Jensen by the board? Any questions of Mr. Jensen by the staff?
No, thank you.
Any questions by the appellant?
And I believe you heard my frustration with only having 5 minutes, because I really do wish we could have developed this testimony a bit further. Were you present at the sentencing hearing, or have any knowledge as to the comments that the judge said?
No, I do not. I was not in person. The testimony and the video recording is part of the public record, and it's part of the Alaska News Source record.
Sure. Thank you, sir. I would just ask that the board, if they do have specific questions, those are serious allegations, that they ask the witness who is present and can testify. So, no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen. Anyone else wishing to testify? Have you been sworn in?
I have not.
Allow me. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth?
Yes, I do.
Please state and spell your name for the record.
My name is Lonnie Darvell, and it's spelled Lonnie, Darvell, Darvell.
Go ahead.
Okay. You know, I'm just a Alaska resident here to testify on behalf of Moose Mamas. It's an amazing organization that
does something that's like what could be more Alaskan, right? To take these moose, we have a huge problem with the amount of moose that are killed on roadways and all these calves that can be rescued. And really it's a small operation that doesn't have like a big impact anywhere that it is. Like as I said, no more than 11 calves at their height, average year 6 calves. What I've witnessed here tonight is, you know, suddenly there's been a shift. You know, Moose Mamas has been in operation for a long time. It wasn't operating in secret. You know, it was operating the entire time with approvals through the city and through zoning and whatnot as well. So really what's changed is they moved a short distance and some new neighbors don't want them there. And those new neighbors seem like they're incredibly distraught that the neighborhood, the association that Moose Mamas is a part of, isn't enforcing covenants or something the way that they think they should be. But really, one association doesn't have any bearing on another one. And that's been established here tonight. So, you know, really, all that's being asked is to allow Moose Mamas to continue as city and zoning has allowed them to operate already. They've got a lot of other constraints that they operate under with fish and game and with the city, you know, and they got to comply with all those things. And they got their work cut out for them doing all those things. There's other bodies that if they're doing something wrong, they're going to handle it, you know. When it comes to bears in this city, this body doesn't have anything to do with how many bears there are in the city, but there is way too many bears in the city, and that's a separate problem. And I think we all know that the biggest contributor to problems with bears is trash bears. The moose, they're out there on the hillside. The bears, they're up there on the hillside. Property owners aren't calling it in that, hey, a moose walked across their property. You know, it's their natural habitat up there. What's being done is really low impact overall in the community. So all I'm asking is allow them to continue. You know, grant what you've already granted in the past and just allow it. That's all I got.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Fargo, by the board? Mr. Hale.
Thank you, through the chair. I guess really have a question of staff. Prior to the request for, you know, the clarification of the use, was this an approved use by the municipality? I know they were operating, but was it approved?
They were operating, there was no formal written approval for this use prior to this use classification request.
Thank you.
So there was no formal written approval, but they came in, would they come in annually and say, we have 5 moose this year, we're going to have 5 from our neighbor, or 15 from 2 different neighbors? Like, has it changed throughout, like, their founding?
Not to my knowledge.
Mr. Quinn. Mr. Quinn? Oh, all right. Anybody else? Staff?
No questions, thank you.
Appellant?
No questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Fargo. Anyone else wishing to testify? Pretty soon we're going to take a break. Have you been sworn in?
Yes, I have.
Please state and spell your name for the record.
My name is George Jacoby, Jacoby.
Go ahead, Mr. Jacoby. Go ahead.
Okay, first off, I'd like to point out that if this was a moose magnet for bears, there would be way more than one incidence in the last 12 years. So that doesn't fly. And also, when the amendments were, or rules were enacted for who could have how many pigs, ducks, chickens. There was nobody thinking about, oh gee, there's somebody going to raise moose calves. That was probably never talked about. So the assembly can say, yeah, this is an Alaskan thing. This is something that we want. This is what Alaskans do. We save moose calves. If we don't, the police, the state troopers, when they find a cow killed on the road, they have to kill them. That's not what I want. That's not what Alaskans want. We have a woman here that dedicates her life to saving these moose. We should allow her to do that. And it's a right thing to do for our assembly to allow this permit. Thank you.
Any questions of Mr. Jacoby by the board? Any questions of Mr. Jacoby by the staff?
No, thank you.
By the appellant? No, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jacoby. Anybody else wishing to testify? Have you been sworn in?
No.
Allow me. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth?
Yes.
Please state and spell your name for the record.
Marcela Peña. Marcela, M-A-R-C-E-L-A, Peña, P-E-N-A.
Go ahead, Ms. Peña.
This has been a really powerful presentation to be a part of. I just walked in as a citizen, wondering what you were doing. This is my third time this week coming by. The last 2 times you weren't even in session. What a brilliant subject to be able to be a part of. The power of the assembly has definitely affected my family. My family was deeply affected by Title 11. 8 taxi permits. My father was in the industry for 25 years, and the assembly dashed my dad's dreams and destroyed an industry. 8 taxi permits had a valuation of over $1 million, and by the day of my parents' death, which was November 8th of 2020, they had a valuation of $44,000. That is the power of the assembly to destroy an entire industry. I have been very compelled by the testimony from this side. Testimony that actually, and very compellingly, urges you to support Moose Mamas. What an incredible mission. I was out of state for 30 years, and the death of my parents brought me back. Title 11 brought me back. The mission of Moose Mamas is incredibly important. It is definitely an Alaskan tradition to love the animals of Alaska. The moose is definitely one of those animals. I deeply urge you to not be affected by the manipulative testimony from the other side, which has been incredibly deceptive and manipulative in a way that is hard to even explain. There was such honesty that came from the actual neighbors that surround Moose's mama. It was powerful to hear that. It was powerful to hear how profoundly and positively this has affected, for decades, those that have lived around it. I have 2 properties that I got to inherit from my parents. One is 28,000 square feet. I would sure love to have moose there. I found it inspiring. I want to support this sanctuary because that's what it feels like to protect calves, 6 calves, 6 calves. I urge you to drown out this noise and protect 6 calves a year.
Ms. Peña? Are there any questions of Ms. Peña by the board? Any questions of Ms. Peña by the staff?
No, thank you.
By the appellant? No, thank you for your testimony. Can we take a break? Okay. We've been going for more than a couple hours, so I'm going to take about a 15-minute break. We're back, and we are in the midst of public testimony. Is there anyone from the public wishing to testify in case 2022-98? Anyone at all? Oh, I cut it right out. Okay. Does the staff have any rebuttal?
Yes, thank you. There's been a lot of testimony tonight. It's all been good. A lot of talk about whether or not the Moose Mamas are a good organization or not, whether it's safe or not. I'd just like to remind the board that is not a question here. The question is what the use classification of their organization is. It has been suggested that perhaps it's an outdoor keeping of animals, or perhaps it's a large domestic animal facility. It cannot be the outdoor keeping of animals because that would only be permitted as accessory to a residential use. An accessory use is defined in Title 21 as incidental and customarily subordinate to the principal use. Rescuing wild moose animals is not customarily subordinate to a residential use. So we wouldn't consider this as an accessory use. Additionally, wild moose are not and don't meet the definition in Title 21 of large domestic animals. The definition in Chapter 15 for large domestic animals is a domestic or semi-domestic animals such as horses, ponies, miniature ponies, cows, pigs, llamas, musk oxen, and other similar animals of similar size, but not dogs. Additionally, the large domestic animal facility definition, as cited earlier, includes uses that are common for domestic animals: riding, stabling, training, these types of activities that are not generally included in what Moose Mamas has called the description of their use. They are a nonprofit organization that rescues wild animals, rehabilitates them, and prepares them for rehoming into the wild. So, in conclusion, we do support the use determination as written, the classification of this use as an animal shelter. Thank you.
Does the appellant have any rebuttal?
Thank you.
You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. First of all, thank you to the board. I served on the platting board. I can particularly say that any hillside matter that came up, I knew to expect a long hearing. So I have been in your position, and sincerely thank you for listening to all the testimony. If there are additional unanswered questions that you have, we have folks here who can answer them much better than I can. I strongly urge you to, if you are concerned about whether or not in the past Moose Mamas has sought verbal approval from the municipality, ask. And I completely agree with the planning department on the fact that you are here to decide the use determination tonight. If you look at pages, starting at page 16 of your staff packet, I go through what are the considerations that you have to make. That is also elsewhere in your packet. It is your job to evaluate the use classification. Your first factor is looking at what is the primary activity going on. That's residential use of the property. You've heard that this is not a year-round use. I haven't heard any testimony about what actually distinguishes holding, I'm pretty sure muskox was included in the category of potentially animals that were domesticated. But what's different between a orphaned moose calf and a horse or a cow calf? If code was black and white, nobody would seek use determinations. It's only in gray situations that we appear in front of you, and you should critically analyze the actual use itself, what is going on the property. Here, you've heard from current neighbors who've never actually lived next to an operation of moose mamas, who are testifying against the proposed use. You've also heard from former neighbors. All of the former neighbors came in support of the use. They all said that it was, and I'm generalizing their testimony, it didn't impact the residential character of the neighborhood, that it didn't cause a nuisance, that it didn't increase bear activity. Those are all factors that you need to be considering as part of your 12-factor analysis. I agree with the staff that most of these 12 factors are just inapplicable. So I would ask that the board focus on the first factor, what is the primary use? If the primary use is residential, you then look at what an accessory use is. And here is housing, temporarily keeping moose calves for 4 months out of the year. Does that somehow convert the use to principal use? It doesn't. That's our position. And I'd say if you could temporarily keep 4 muskox or even 4 large pigs on your property for 4 months out of the year, then we've met this factor. I would look at the definition of large domestic animal facility on page 24. Also, this is the first time that staff has articulated what their interpretation of the keeping of, what the outdoor keeping of animals is. And it's frustrating to be introduced to that argument I have 36 seconds. I will just say that you can interpret code separately, and you cannot read in that there's supposed to be guinea fowl and other fowl animals and large pigs, that those are the only exclusions you can have in the use-specific standards. That doesn't appear in code, and you're entitled to interpret code based on what code actually says. Again, our standard is preponderance of the evidence, and I would ask that you ask our witnesses if you have any further questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. So at this point, the public hearing is closed, and the matter rests with the board. Never mind. Mr. Quinn.
I just have some questions of staff. Should I ask those now or after we close public comment?
Now.
Okay. So can there be more than one primary use for a piece of property?
In some districts, it is allowed. In most residential districts, it is not.
Okay. For an animal shelter use classification, the animal shelter part has to be the principal use, or the primary use.
A large domestic animal facility can be either a principal use or an accessory use.
Okay.
in order for it to be an accessory use, it has to be considered incidental and customarily subordinate to the principal use.
Okay, another question. So what happens if it's defined as atypical? If it doesn't meet a certain definition, if you guys exert this atypical use, what happens with that?
There are two avenues. One, it can be written as an atypical use, and the planning director can determine what zoning districts that use is permitted in, and it can end there, or it can initiate a code change to add another use to the code if the planning director determines that it may be, common or reoccurring more than just once.
Okay, but if the definition is not clear-cut, then the planning department can put it into atypical, and then do they kind of make their own terms based off other uses, or how does that work?
Yeah, a lot of research would go into it. We'd look at other jurisdictions. We would look at state, federal laws and regulations, and yeah, basically make a determination about where the use would be appropriate and whether it would be appropriate in what types of zoning districts, similar to the process of all of the uses that all of the uses have in the code have already gone through.
Then I guess another question that I have is just about the use classification process. So in this case, I guess one point of clarification is, let me pull out information here. I saw that there was an email sometime end of May, I'm trying to find it right now, and then MOA responded to that email and defined the property, or the use, as being most similar to a, so there's an email sent on May 25th by Dana, and then in response to that email, MOA said that the use of your lot for raising moose calves is most similar to Title 21 regulations for a large domestic animal facility. What information was provided in this email from Dana? I'm just unclear of that. I just see this thing that they're asking for how many calves they can put on the property.
So there was a telephone conversation, and she asked the question about, raising some baby moose calves on the property. During that telephone conversation, I answered the question. I said, well, it sounds kind of like a large domestic animal facility. I didn't ask questions about her organization. I didn't go in depth into what they did. I made an off-the-cuff call. She then came back and said, hey, can you put that in writing? So I did. Very shortly thereafter, the current planning manager and the planning director came to me and said, hey, we've been talking with folks about this, and we've already made a different determination, so we think that this needs some additional research, and we need to proceed with a formal use classification on this. At that point, they reached out to the Moose Mamas organization, asked them to apply for a formal use classification, which they did, and on June 8th, the determination was written with the concurrence of the current planning manager and the planning director.
Those are all my questions.
Any other questions of staff? Mr. Romerdahl?
Through the chair. So to your comment you just made, it sounded like those were not conversations that were in alignment. You were having a conversation with the appellant stating that it seemed like a large domestic animal facility. And then I believe you said you were told that from the planning director that they had already made a determination of can you elaborate on that comment?
They had thought that it was probably not a large domestic animal facility, and that they wanted it to be researched further. into what the actual organization and operations were on the property.
Are you aware of what information kind of instigated that comment? Something had to trigger that. It sounded like they came to you, that they already had an idea in their head. I'm just curious what transpired.
They had received some questions, and I'm not sure who those questions came from. But they had received questions, so they had, at the same time I had been having conversations, they had been having conversations with other people.
Two more comments. Unrelated to that, I'm curious, is it possible for the planning department planning director to confirm an accessory atypical use? Is that possible?
Yes.
Okay. And then is there a vehicle, outside of that, is there another vehicle to amend the list of currently accepted accessory uses within or under an R10 zone?
That would require a code change if you were going to, actually amend code.
Okay. But to your earlier comment, it's possible to do an atypical, and that atypical use determination does not necessarily have to come with a redesignation of the code.
Correct.
It can be sort of a one-off.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Flynn?
Yes, I just wanted to follow up. You said that the accessory use is attached to customarily subordinate use. Can you just elaborate what does that mean?
So customarily subordinate is something that you would, typically find with whatever your principal use is. In a restaurant type of situation, you would customarily find storage. The storage would be accessory to the restaurant because your restaurant is your main use on the property, but you have to have the storage in order to operate the use. Mm-hmm. You have a storage shed or a garage on a residential piece of property. Those are accessory uses that are customarily subordinate to the residential use. So the principal use dictates what is customarily subordinate. It typically has to be related to whatever the principal use is.
So when the designation was given as an animal shelter, was that designated as an accessory use to the residential?
So an animal shelter is not listed in code as an accessory use. An animal shelter is only listed as a principal use. Therefore, it would not be considered an accessory use any place it would be located.
But isn't the principal use of this property a residence?
I'm not sure I understand. So when you have a residence in a residential district, yes, the residence would be a principal use that is permitted in a residential district.
Right. So are you saying there could be two principals?
In some districts, there are allowed more than one principal use. In most residential districts, only one principal use is allowed.
That was my understanding. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions of staff? Mr. Romerdahl?
Through the chair, can you speak to the discussion, if any, in this particular case of looking at an atypical use, whether it be primary or accessory in this current case?
In this particular case, we wouldn't look at it as whether it was accessory or principal because the use classification indicates it as an animal shelter, which is only permitted as a principal use. If it were an atypical use, then the planning director could make a determination about whether it was permitted as principal or accessory. But in order for it to be accessory, he would have to determine that it was customarily subordinate, which customarily means usual, and subordinate means, secondary to the principal use. Does that answer the question?
No, I guess to clarify, was there any talk of a atypical use, let's say primary, sorry, I might have confused the issue. Was there ever talk of assigning an atypical use to the subject property, primary being that it maybe didn't fit into either of the stated districts or designations?
There was not, because it seemed clear, based on the definition of animal shelter and the description of the Moose Mamas organization, that it fit into that use category.
Mr. Quinn?
I'm going to be a little repetitive here, but just so I'm 100% sure, in this zoning district, you can only have one principal use, right?
That is correct.
Okay, and an animal shelter has to be a principal use for that use classification?
That's correct.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay. I'm going for it. Public hearing is closed, and the matter rests with the board. May I have a positive motion, please? I can't do it. Somebody has to do it. You don't have it written down. She's working on it. Mr. Smythe?
I move in case 2022-0098 to approve the appeal of an animal shelter use determination for the Moose Mamas facility located at 6673 Shangri-La Circle.
And seconded by Mr. Quinn. It has been moved and seconded that appeal be granted to approve that. Well, it has been moved and seconded to approve an appeal of an animal shelter use determination for Moose Mamas facility located at 6673 Shangri-La Circle. Will the maker please speak to your motion?
Yes, I do not intend to support my motion. I think one of the interesting parts about this, and living in Anchorage and everything, the testimony that we've heard today, is that we get to a situation where we're discussing moose calves in a residential neighborhood. And while it's irrelevant whether or not I support the program or the folks that believe in it, I do recognize the passion that people have and support it, and I appreciate that. But the question before us today is whether or not that use designation is incorrect. And I have to agree with the municipality. I believe that what I've seen happen in the past is that any decision upon further examination, which is exactly what happened here, warrants more information and can be changed. I think that it was incorrectly assigned earlier. I think with further investigation, it was correctly assigned, that it does meet the requirements or the definition of shelter, and therefore has to be dealt with as such. No further comment.
Mr. Quinn.
I will be supporting the motion to approve, the motion. If there can only be one primary use in this zoning district, then the animal shelter use classification doesn't work. The primary use is a residential house. It's a seasonal animal facility. Everything about it is secondary. The program is secondary to living in the house. The program itself is seasonal. If you can only have one primary use for that zoning district, then it can't be an animal shelter.
Is there any further discussion? Mr. Myers.
Thank you. I lost my screen, so I couldn't figure out where to say that I wanted to speak. I would speak in opposition of the motion only, and not because what they do is good work. No one's disputing that. It's the location in which the work is done in an R10 zoning district does violate code to have an animal shelter. And to me, it seems like an animal shelter based on what they're doing, rehabilitating wildlife to be released back into the wild. We heard a lot of testimony that they had verbal approval, even from their council, but verbal approval doesn't give them an actual approval. My other concern was violating the conditions, codes, and restrictions that are recorded for that subdivision. I think if we were to allow this, then if somebody wanted to come in and open a bear sanctuary in a residential neighborhood to care for bear cubs, are we going to have to approve that? Or wolves? So I just would be voting no on the motion.
Mr. Quinn.
Yeah, the CC&Rs are irrelevant here. That's an HOA neighborhood issue. We're looking at use classification. We don't enforce CC&Rs. So if the homeowners association has an issue with it, then they can kind of take it up upon themselves to take whatever action is that they want to take. Yeah, that's all I have there.
Mr. Romertal?
Yeah, through the chair, I do intend to support the motion. To my earlier comments, I think to me, it feels like the definition of an atypical use. You've ever only had one of these in the municipality. That makes it atypical, and so I'm not sure why that wasn't discussed further earlier on the proceedings before the determination was made as a shelter. But I agree to speak to her to support Mr. Quinn's comments. There's no way that you can look at a residential property with the seasonal auxiliary use and call that auxiliary use the primary. I don't see it, so.
Not going to happen. Anyone else? Okay, guess it's me. We're not here to decide the value of the program. We are here to decide if the planning department made an error in use classification determination. When we are appointed to the board, we swear to uphold the law, in this case, the land use section of the municipal code, Title 21. Title 21 lays out what is and is not allowed in each zoning district. This isn't a request to grant a variance. It isn't a request to amend the code. It isn't a request to rezone the property. It's an appeal of a decision by the planning director, which is in our jurisdiction as per the code. The planning department has characterized this as a secondary activity. The appellant sees it as an accessory use, and I'm not sure what the difference between the two is. So I'm going to continue on that this is an accessory use, not a principal use. So the table on 2105-3 applies in this case. The table lists outdoor keeping of animals and large domestic animal facility, but not animal shelter, as we've heard. Both categories that are listed speak to domestic animals. A large domestic animal facility is permitted use with a conditional use review, but the definition speaks to 4 or more domestic animals. The outdoor keeping of animals is permitted use, but is restricted to 1 to 3 large domestic animals. Moose are not domestic animals. Despite the appellant's creative use of semantics, I think the code is clear through definitions and examples that moose are not in the category of domestic animals. The planning department determined that the use classification most closely resembles an animal shelter. The definition of an animal shelter is not limited to domestic animals. The definition, a facility used to house or contain stray, homeless, abandoned, or unwanted animals, and that is owned and operated and maintained by a public nonprofit organization devoted to the welfare, protection, and humane treatment of animals, appears to be spot on. As an animal shelter, it is not listed as an accessory use and not permitted as a principal use in the R10 SL zoning district. It is then, by code, not permitted. It is unfortunate that the appellant was initially told that the use is most similar to large domestic animal facility, but this is clearly an error. And for these reasons, I will not be supporting the motion. If there's no other discussion, we will vote. Wait, I forgot to clarify that. Okay. So the question is on the adoption of the motion to grant an appeal. A yes vote will grant the appeal, and a no vote will deny the appeal. It's not? Oh. Okay, I guess we're going to have to do a voice. So is everybody clear on what yes and no means? Okay.
Mr. Smythe?
No.
Mr. Hale?
No.
Ms. McKay?
No.
Ms. Sabina?
No.
Mr. Quinn?
Yes.
Mr. Romerdahl?
Yes.
Mr. Flynn?
Yes.
Mr. Myers?
No.
Okay, there are 2 votes in the affirmative and 4 votes in the negative. Where's? Oh, there we go. My screen wasn't reading right. There are 3 votes in the affirmative and 5 votes in the negative. The appeal is denied. Next item on the agenda is reports. No reports from the chair, no reports from the secretary, no committees. Any board member comments? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
No, maybe. Oh, sorry.
Moved by Mr. Quinn, seconded by Mr. Hale. We are adjourned. Oof.